Thanks for hanging out, guys. I put together an outline to follow, and I meant to be, as I go, ask the questions as we're going on. I don't like the way that looks. Okay. First off, we started tile fishing probably in the mid-90s and going into the 2000s because the tuna fishing wasn't what it had been years before. It was nothing to go out, load up on as many big eyes and yellow fins as you wanted, no room left on the boat, and come home. Then it started changing a bit. You could almost set it with a clock when the tuna would bite. And we would be up on the troll by 4 a.m. and it'd be over by 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then you'd wonder what you were going to do between then and maybe 4:30, 5 in the evening, and you'd start to get the sun going down a bit, and the tuna bite might start up again. And even at that, at night, we would wait for the midnight bite, and then it was the 1 o'clock bite, and then the bite was coming at 3. And it became very inconsistent. Yeah. So we picked up on tile fishing. As soon as the bite was over at 8:30, 9 a.m., we would head to the tile grounds. Or in those days, I had specific tile grounds. The southwest corner, it was numbers everyone had, and it worked for a while. And then we started discovering that when we fished, it's small to the tiles. So what ended up happening was I learned that, well, I did a lot of studying. So I started hunting, learning their habits, and seeing what you needed to get them. So the first thing we learned is that to find where they live, you need to learn what type of a bottom you need to have. Then we learned it was mud, so we'd find muddy bottom. But then we learned it was a mix of clay and mud. So then we started looking at the older charts, the old government charts instead of the newer fancy ones, and they listed the bottom sediment pretty good. So we started going to find the spots that had the kind of bottom they liked, and basically found all our own spots. That's why I wrote down here the GPS numbers don't work well, and they get fished out. The larger fish get caught, and then you go back year after year and you get small fish. That's usually what happens with numbers you get from other people now. The good thing about that is give it 2-3 years and you can go back to them because the smaller fish start growing again. So the spots never go away, you just have to let them rest a bit. So you find their burrows in clay, mud, and a combination bottom, and look for inclines. You'll see that little picture I put on the back. Those burrows are in a vertical surface. On locating them and how to find them. All right, the next thing is the kind of tackle I use to get them. These are basically the 3 setups we have on the boat for all the conditions. This is your standard electric. This is my reel of choice because it's pretty small and you can stand up and hold it. Now, one thing about these, you'll see lots of guys with the 1000. It's about that much wider, and it's filled with 55 to 65 to 80 pound test, and that's going to kill you. This reel is one of my heavy setups, or I call it heavy, and it's got 40 pound test on it. The idea to catch tilefish is you have to be on the bottom. And it goes pretty much with what Mike had said about the bass fishing and light line. You need as light a line as possible to cut through the water and not be dragged out by the current. Very rare I need over 32 ounces with any of our tackle. Now on the end of this, we're using, this is 40 pound, braid, I've got a rod length of 50-pound fluoro as my shock leader. You really don't want a lot of fluoro because it's going to take off like a sail. Our rigs are the same way. You typically buy tilefish rigs, and people make them like Florida grouper rigs. They're 250-pound test. 12-0 circle hooks are bigger, gigantic black 3-way swivels, and they're sails. As you're putting them down, the current's taking them, and they're flying away from you. And then that's when you start needing the 3 pounds to hold. Now, a lot of people like to use cranks instead of the electric. The crank setups I have a bit lighter and easier to hold and work because you're sitting there cranking and you're going to hold it all day. These reels, I'll probably have about 2,200 feet. Again, these have 40-pound test on them. These reels take up about 50 inches on a crank. So it makes it easy, and if a fish is giving you a hard time, it is a 2-speed, so just drop it down to low. Then we get to jigging. With the jigging setup, you can see how light this is. This is a slow pitch jigging rod. This particular one is good for up to a jig of 450 grams. This is on the small side. This reel has 20-pound test on it. Because when you're jigging, you have to keep the jig vertical. If the jig starts scoping out, it's just not going to work. You pull up like this, and all it's doing is picking itself in midair. I mean, it's out there and floating. So you have to keep them vertical, and that's what determines how much jig you can use. If the current's flowing, this is about the heaviest I'd go. It's stuck to this thing now, but this is 600 grams. You also have to pay attention if they're not biting. They're not that finicky, but they can be. There are times when that's not getting a bite, no matter what we're doing, and these will hold, and this shape gets the bites. They're obviously looking for a smaller bait or something. I don't know what's going on. It's pitch black down there. There's zero light. We had a customer, or one of my customers comes out with me every year and brings a bunch of GoPro cameras and puts them all around everything and has pictures. He sent one down to 800 feet and you couldn't see a thing. It was black. When you're using bait with a high-low rig, back to this rod here, again, you want to keep the scope to a minimum. We set the high-low rig is almost like a sea bass rig, but I'll have about 3 feet between the low hook and the high hook and have that about 10 inches off the sinker. We start off using 24 ounces, 16 if it's beautiful. That's the least I've ever been able to get away with. And if we have to, we'll take a 24 and add a 10 ounce to it and tape it together or something. But the goal is to be on the bottom. These fish are sort of like blackfish. They don't swim up. They don't come off the bottom. When we're jigging, we keep that jig within inside of a 4-foot range, bouncing off the bottom and coming up 3 feet, 4 feet, bouncing off the bottom. And every time you make it have a wild action if you want, I'll sit it and go like that. Now, I'm always asked, can you get away with doing that with a rod like this? Or even, why can't you just put a jig on this? The answer is these jigging rods are specifically made so that when you pick it up, the rod breaks. It gives a big bend, but then it snaps right back. So it's doubling the action you could possibly be giving it. And then you'll be going like that. Oops. Then going like that. Going like that, it's hitting the bottom every time, and then you'll just go like that, and the rod's going to bend, there's a fish on. At that point, that rod has to stay high. You can't let it down, and you just start cranking. Now, bait, everything's going to have a circle hook. On the jigging rod, obviously, I usually have 4 hooks on every jig, like that. They're always rigged so that they're facing each other, like that and like that, so that when the fish bites, it's going to come up and it's not getting caught on a hook. These go in like that, and it's almost like a trap. So they're going to get hit with one of them. As soon as they bite, those 2 hooks are going to go together, and they're going to expand, and you typically get both hooks in, or you'll have one hook in on this end, and one of these will be in on the body, something like that. Now, where the tuna part comes in, it's typically about now, but now our water is very, very cold. There is no water, there's no temp break, so the bluefin will not be coming in. There is about a 4 or 5 degree break, probably about another 50 miles south of the Hudson Canyon. And there might be a good chance of bluefin being there, but they're not going to be where there's no temperature break and the water is 42 degrees. That's what it is right now, 42 to 43 degrees. When we do get a break, it's typical that it goes right through the tile grounds. So what we'll do is, when I bait a bait hook or use a jig, all of our baits are just like fluke baits. I use everything as a pennant. You could use the pennants and about that big, that long, only put them through the hook once, and they sit and flutter nicely. We typically get 2 or 3 bluefin literally by mistake. That's how it started, just dropping for the tiles. They'll hit a bait just as easy as they'll hit a jig on the way down. Once you're jigging a jig, they're not going to hit on the bottom like a tile would, but it's always on the drop every time. I've had people on the boat drop the hook. I've actually dropped it and handed the rod to a customer, and all of a sudden he's saying, there's something wrong, the reel's not, I don't feel anything. And I'm looking in the lines like 100 yards out already, and they're fighting a bluefin on 20-pound test line and a little Avid SX reel. Okay, works. They just gonna have to be in the mood to fight it for a while, but nothing's ever broke. So with that, talked about the rods. The bait I use, I'll always go out with squid. I get long line squids from the wholesaler. They're all about that big, fat and healthy, and I always strip them. I do not use them whole. Just like I said, I'll use fluke strips, and I'll typically put 2 on the hook so that there's like double the flutter and they just move. Put the hook on the bottom, and as they're falling, you'd be surprised how many bluefin have hit us over the years doing this. What I use for bait is the squid. I get herring. Same thing. You can just chunk the herring, and you can put chunks on the hook, but you won't get a tuna if you have a chunk on the hook and it's dropping, it's that fast. But if you have a strip on the hook, they'll hit on the way down. It looks like a fish to them. If the dogfish are killing you out there, which is why I haven't gone yet with the water this cold, you'll be lucky if you get it down to the tilefish, and you're going to be cranking in dogfish from 600, 700, 800 feet, and that's not fun, loading the boat up with dogfish. Whatever you're catching there, that's a side catch. Lots of times bluefish are out there. Perfect baits to cut up into strips. Just trim them a bit, make them look nice, make a pennant about that long, and you're in. The tilefish love them. And probably one of the best baits for tilefish is they are cannibals. So they do eat their young. So you start stripping small tiles you catch, and you've got the best bait there is. Yeah, you can't throw them back, so you're supposed to keep them all. The limit now is 8. The limit now is 8 golden tiles per person and 5 blue lines. So you have a decent chance of going home with a lot of meat too, as compared to like I think our sea bass is going to be 3 now. So this time, fluke is 3, so you come home with a ton of meat. They also, it's 10 to 12 pounds is pretty typical. Very common to get a 20 to a 30 pounder. And occasionally we do pull in a nice 50 pounder or so. And when you get into the range of even 20, 25 plus, they really fight good. They'll be pulling drag. On my boat, you'll see nothing has a bent butt, so nothing goes into the rod holder. The guys are all standing up holding the rods and going like that. We put belts on them to help the belly and their home personal equipment. And it's a blast. Everybody just has a great time catching these things. The jigs, again, appropriate for the depth. 600 is the biggest I have on the boat, because if 600 can't do it, I know people have 800 and some people have thousands, but the current is probably moving way too much. Just go to 32 ounces on a sinker and drop a hook. If the current is still strong, cut one of the hooks off your rig and just use a single rig, and that'll cut down on the amount of current pulling the rig away also. So again, the success to tile fishing is keeping the bait straight down on the bottom, not letting it float up. Keep letting line out as you are drifting to the point where you just got to reel it back in, because then if you have the 3 or 4 pounds on it and you have 150 yards out, you're lucky when you get the fish because you're not feeling anything bite anyway. So I tried to make it as short as I can. Anybody have any questions about any of that?
Dave, I just got one. Could you just clarify like the different depths that you use each lure? Like from the deepest to the shallowest?
A rule of thumb for a jig is, well, this one, if I see tuna on the fish finder with 100 feet up, this is what I use for tuna. This thing, I can't tell you how much this particular jig probably caught 15 tuna, I don't know. This little one, this is 425 grams. This is a heavy jig. It's typical that the amount of grams is the sort of distance or depth that you could use. So 420 should be good up to 400, 450 feet, by theory. The 600s you can use in 600 feet. You know, I'm probably 6 to 7, 8 sometimes. I try to fish and keep the drift down to about a knot. Many times I do have to put out a drift anchor to keep the angle of the boat correct and slow the drift down a bit. Again, it's all conditions and it's all finding the right muddy bottom, and it's not difficult. Just when the sinker hits, I'm sure all you know the difference of black fishing and maybe fluke fishing or sea bass fishing. Blackfish, you want the sinker to go down, you want it to hit a rock. You want it to hit a hard surface that you could feel. With these, they're not going to be on a hard surface because there's no burrows they could be in. And that's about it. I tried to just make it a lot shorter because of the time.
Anybody have any other questions? For Gene, I think Gene's got a
Why
question.
don't you like lights, Dave?
Like I said, I've never seen them make a difference, number one, and number two, it's pitch black down there, and these things have big eyes. So I'm more afraid of too much light. Even when you're sword fishing, that light's supposed to be 50 feet away from your bait.
Right, okay.
All right? And we don't have that kind of distance, so that's going to be like a spotlight shining in somebody's eyes.
Right.
My own theory, but it works. Yeah, Mike.
Hey, when you're using the jigging rod, what kind of motion are you giving to that quote, slow pitch jigging rod?
Okay, that's a good question. The tile fish, first off, the jigs I use are certain shapes, and they give themselves, they don't go straight down. they'll go down, zigzag, something like this. One side is perfectly flat, one side is rounded, and it's identical in shape. So something like this will go like that, like that, like that. Okay? So I'm only fishing in a 4-foot spot. So I'm not going to fish it the same way you watch on television and stuff like that, where guys are coming up the water column and they're giving a steady, and then you turn a half a crank, turn 2 cranks, turn a half a crank, turn 3/4 of a crank, because every time you do something different, it makes the jig go like that. But we're just putting it down, and like I said, I'm just going to be holding the rod. I typically have it in one hand, and I'll go like this, way off to the side, and make it shoot like that, and then it'll hit the bottom. And then I'll go straight up and let it drop free fall. You're always letting it drop free fall. That's the way these rods work. You go up like that, they'll bend, and all by themselves, they'll snap up and give the jig action. Otherwise, if you're not using a rod like that, you'll pull it up. They'll pull it up, but when you put it down, it's just dropping back down. There's no imparted action with this.
And so how often are you checking the bottom to make sure you're still in that?
Every drop with the jig has to hit the bottom.
Every drop?
Every drop. These fish are bottom feeders. If you see one, you'll know it moved from a deeper area to a shallow area. It'll have a yellow belly. As opposed to if you catch one with a white belly, that one is in the spot and hasn't moved. The yellow bellies they swim literally with their bottom bellies scraping the bottom. So that's like rubbing makes their bottoms yellow. That's how you tell. They call it a migration fish, but they don't migrate far.
I would have thought that would have been opposite.
Excuse me?
I would have thought that would have been opposite. A white bottom, because you're scraping off the bottom, that it would have been a white bottom.
Yeah, the yellowish.
Bottom would be the one that just sits in one spot.
The yellowish would be the same as maybe scar tissue. Actually, it was a tilefish longliner that told me that. That's, I'm just saying, it surprised me too, because I never noticed, I didn't think anything of some of them being white and some of them being yellow on the bottom. It was just another fish in the box.
How do they long line for tiles?
Like the same way they long line on the surface, but they're on a heavier line with weights on them, and they drop right to the bottom. A lot of rigs, there are a couple of rigs where you have a sinker and they'll have 4 or 5 hooks spaced a foot apart with another sinker on that end, so that you have 5 hooks laying on the bottom. I would never use anything like that, just because you're allowed to catch 8 fish. If you pulled up 2 or 3, what are you going to have, an hour's worth of fishing for a day? Something more fun catching one at a time. Anything else?
The bluefin tuna you go for, you only go while you're out there tile fishing?
No, I'll go just for tuna. But lately, they haven't been in the canyon. You can go out 60 miles from us, 50, 60 miles off of Cambria Wreck, the Yankee vicinity, sometimes even into the Linda vicinity, or going south to, off of Jersey, 40 miles off of Jersey. So they're there.
Off a rock
Well, those are giants. That's a different story.
Jones Beach.
There's nothing in here for giants. And if you're a recreational fisherman, you probably shouldn't be going after them. I think they've even eliminated the one trophy fish. Giants of a commercial fisherman, and the yellowfin, small school bluefin, and albacore. You only get them offshore. They're never close. They're all for the recreational angler. Under 73 inches, basically, we can catch them. Okay, thanks a million. Thank you very much.
Just last question.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, guys. Could you just briefly talk how you locate the tuna? Like, people say different stuff. You mentioned temperature a little bit. Just if you could talk about just like how, your go-to for locating.
Okay, one thing I stopped doing years ago was just saying, I'm in the canyon, let's put out our spread and start trolling for tuna. I haven't done that in 7, 8 years because you're just wasting a lot of time. I won't put the spread even out until I see some kind of a sign. Birds sitting around, birds flying, slicks in the water, or physically seeing bait balls or something down below the boat on the sounder. Okay, so I have to see a sign for the tuna. When we're on the tile grounds, if I know there's tuna around, I'll start putting, I have an automatic chunker, I'll start putting chunks out the other side of the boat the whole time we're tile fishing and have the tuna come up. Twice last year, we were tile fishing and stopped when the tuna started breaking the surface, going through our slicks. And then guys were either dropping jigs or they took their tile rigs off and just lined out a chunk and stuff. And, a lot of the people, they love fishing on party boats or charter boats and stuff, but they might not be the sharpest fishermen around. And we went, one trip last year, we went 1 for 17. It was a very frustrating day for me. When you start getting in the 80-pound class, it's not like catching a 40, 45 pounder. As soon as you hit close to that 100-pound mark, it's a different animal. Sure is. And if you don't know, I'm screaming. I'm hoarse at the end of a trip. I'm screaming. I'm saying, the guy will be sitting here on the starboard corner of the boat, and the fish is going that way, and I'll say, move, you got to move. You can't fish across the boat. And they'll move to here, but then the fish is over there again. And I have to say the same thing. Then a fish comes around, we get it close, and it takes a dive under the boat, and I have to get him out of the harness. Either my mate grabs a rod, or he'll listen to me, stick the rod way into the water, and walk around the boat with the rod down under the water. It's crazy. It's nothing we haven't done years ago, right, Mike?
That's right.
So Dave, if somebody wants to book a trip with you, how can they find you? Do you have a website or something?
Yeah, Facebook or website, Real World Charters. Just like Mike, been doing this. My captain's license is from 1987. I don't want to give a hint of how old I am, and these overnight trips, or these trips for the tile trip basically, or the tile and tuna trip, then starting in July, end of July I'll say for sure, we switch over to tile and we just stop tile fishing because we typically hit our limit. Make sure all 5 or 6 people on the boat catch their 8 fish, and then we'll stop tile fishing and move over to the pots, and then it's all mayhem with mahi fishing. And that's nuts because we'll put chunks, we'll go right up to a pot, throw a handful of chunks in. They've got the same kind of chunks on their little spinning reels. I didn't bring one of them, but we use light spinning tackle, and there's no casting. It's all you need is somebody to be going like this on a charter boat and grab somebody's ear or something like that. So all we do is just open the spool and drop it out, send it back. I'm very close. They'll send it right past the ball or wherever we saw them, and the whole area lights up from all the chum in the water. Try to leave the first one in the water unless they're too excited, and they just rip them into the boat. You can't gaff them. It takes too long, and if there's 5 people and everybody's got a fish on, you don't have the time to gaff or net each fish. You just swing them into the boat. My mate's standing in the back getting slapped with fish from every side. It's hysterical, but everybody has a blast doing it. So it starts off with tuna fish. A little later than now, it's going to wait until the run begins with some water coming into the canyon, And then from tuna, we'll move over to mahi-mahi.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We appreciate you coming.
You're welcome, guys. Thank you.
Good job, Dave.